Welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome again to the program for about the, I can't count, umpteenth time, Nira Renfrew, a dear and darling friend of mine and the world's, and she can be identified, as you can see, as a supporter of the Occupy movement, among other things. She's one, as I've said on many occasions, one of the smartest people in all of New York and perhaps the world. And once again, so good to welcome you. You're looking like Guy Fawkes, but welcome, Nita Renfrew, right? Okay, so tell us, how are you going? What do you see? We're now talking on the 22nd of March in the year 2012. What's your general assessment, having seen the attempt at a 6-month anniversary downtown and so forth, be greeted with police activity and so on. But what's your sense about the state of the Occupy movement on a planetary scale?
I think the Occupy movement in New York, the Occupy Wall Street movement, has been busy organizing all winter for the spring.
Good.
And I think they got off to a very good start that day. There were estimates of about 1,000 people at the park that night.
Okay.
Some people said there may have been 600, but there were at least 600 people. And none of these people left when the police came at 10:30. They were all prepared. They all stood their ground.
Well, they stood their ground, but they were dragged off.
Well,
there were 100 arrested.
But what do you want them to do? Meaning they knew. Meaning you know that the police is going to come. I mean that's part of what's happening.
Okay, yeah.
But anyway, but the police brutality was terrible. I mean they had ambulances there.
Yeah.
So my question is, if the police didn't expect to have a lot of injured people, what are the ambulances doing there? And they did terrible things. I mean, there's videos on the net where you can see them slamming a young man's head into a glass door where it breaks, and then you can see a woman who's having an epileptic fit, and the police are not doing anything to help her. Right. And not only that, they prevented a medical person from approaching her. Yeah. And
she was in seizure. Yeah.
She went into seizure.
Yeah. I saw that on television this morning. And from one of our camera people, not the mainline media.
We have all this. Well,
you don't see that on. You don't see that on the mainline media, ABC.
It's on several things like Truth Out and so on. And on one of these,
thank God for the internet.
One of these articles that's been online where you click on that scene when they talk about it. And what was so interesting to me is that, that now on the YouTube they have all these ads. And so the ads, they kept interrupting the people talking about this woman and also about the man having his head slammed into the broken glass. They kept interrupting with little ads for Capital Bank, I believe it was. And underneath underneath the banner was talking about cruises in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, right. For the burglar class,
And I thought that was actually more interesting than the news itself. Is this juxtaposition of how screwed up this society is, how dysfunctional it is, that they would have ads for Capital Bank in the middle of something like that. When when Occupy Wall Street is basically, I mean, it came into being to protest the structural oppression by the banks. And
by the banks and the system.
But I mean, Occupy Wall Street is about the banks. Wall Street is about the banks and the stock market, and that's the banks. Okay.
Right.
So that was the raison d'être, and the banks really run everything. I mean,
Okay. Right. Okay.
I mean, they're the crux of the whole matter.
Well. Okay.
But I want to talk about this idea of structural violence or structural oppression, structural criminality, because that's basically what Occupy Wall Street is standing up against. A lot of people want them to be more specific, but the whole point is that it isn't about individual actions by banks. It's about the structure itself, the structure of oppression, where the structure itself, it's built into it. And we live in a society which is built on structural oppression. I mean, it's like the military, this comes from the War Resisters League. And they show that this is the...
Which is the robotic camera? It's the middle one. Let me hold it up.
No, but let me explain what it is first, before you hold it up.
Okay.
So it comes from the War Resistor Leagues, which is very involved
David
in...
McReynolds.
God bless him. They're very involved in. They were involved in planning the whole Occupy Wall Street.
Well, they've been involved for decades and decades and decades. God bless them.
They haven't been involved for decades in Occupy Wall Street.
No,
I'm talking about Occupy Wall Street. Okay. So they've been. They're very involved because that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're very involved in Occupy Wall Street. And this they put out. It's for the U.S. federal budget for 2013 fiscal year. Mm-hmm. And it shows that the military budget in this country takes up 47% of the taxes.
Is that a fact?
47%.
That's staggering. Yeah.
And which is staggering. And of course, 18% of it is the past military. It's the pensions and the VA and all that sort of thing, which we wouldn't have if we didn't have all these wars and things.
That's right. And that's on top of the 40.
No, that's part of the. That's part of the 47. Part of the 47%.
Right.
29% is the current military, which is pretty high. That's almost a third of our whole entire budget.
Right.
And out of that, $89 billion for wars in Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan. They don't factor in Libya here.
Well, no, that's right.
But it's the military. 47%. It looks like it's 1,355 billion with a B dollars.
Right.
I mean, this is obscene. This is what you call structural violence, structural oppression, structural dysfunction. So
those on the left would call it an imperialist outreach.
Well, so what I want to say,
is that of America, by and large,
is that the problem with this, the big problem is that people who say I don't want to think about this and everything. Well, you're part of the structural system because as long as you're part of the system, if you're not opposing the system, you're part of it. So you're supporting the structural. You're supporting it by not saying anything. And you're supporting it every time you pay taxes. If you pay income taxes, if you pay, if you buy something, everything has built-in taxes aside from the sales tax. So just every time you buy something in a store, you're supporting a company. If it's a big company, you're supporting a company that has this structural oppression built in. So you're supporting it. Like you can't get away from it just because you say I'm not going to buy anything that's been imported from. I don't know, from
the Congo or something.
From
Somebody
Israel.
wants them to stop using cell phones in the Congo.
It doesn't matter because if you're buying, for instance, when I got this mask.
Yeah, you had to go all over town to get it.
But this mask is, it
that's
belongs,
not the real you.
The image. Well, it is the real me.
Oh,
but
okay. Okay.
So it belongs to, I can't remember which one of these movie companies or something. So I'm by paying for this mask, I'm actually giving profits to this company.
The producers of V for Vendetta. Yeah,
so you and I are complicitous, you see. So the only thing we can do is to change the system. And what Occupy Wall Street is doing, which no one else has been able to do, and we have to support them to the hilt, as long as they continue to do this, they are the prophetic voice that is speaking truth to power. They're people criticize them because they're not painting a vision of what the future should look like or anything. Well, I'm sure some people are on the left, some people are on the right, some people, you have a whole bunch of people. What we need to all agree upon is what's wrong with the system. We need to shed light on it. You can only change things if you name them. It's like you can't change things by being in denial or by pretending that everything is beautiful in the world.
Okay, let me make a premise.
And that's what they're doing.
Okay.
They are speaking up as the prophetic voice.
Okay.
And we live in a system. We live in a system that is basically built on the principles of Judaism and Christianity more than anything else. So the Bible, the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is certainly a part of the fabric of this culture. And in the Old Testament, it was these prophets like Jeremiah and Elijah who spoke out against the system. This is our cultural tradition. They were not popular people. At the time, and they spoke out against things like, Jeremiah spoke out about, how the Jews had broken their covenant with God because they were exploiting their own people, and that's why things were not going well. Because, the people on the right in the movement were saying, well, it's happening because we're not going to temple enough, or we're not worshiping. And
you mean at the time of Jeremiah?
At the time of Jeremiah. Yeah, Jeremiah was saying, no, it's because there are certain people here who are exploiting other people and who are taking up the land and taking more than their share, and it's not going around. So this is, in a sense, what the Occupy movement is saying. And I say that because we live in a Jewish city, one. Well, and okay, so this is the tradition, and I'm trying to speak a language that we understand. Now, in the theological Christian tradition, this is referred to as structural sin, and that term comes out of the sort of the Latin American. Where do they go? The theology, the liberation theology movement.
Oh yeah, okay. John.
Ernesto Cardenal, who was a friend of mine, and so on. I went with him to Iran to visit Khomeini. He was one of the key people with the Sandinista revolution, and I was a supporter of theirs. I've been involved in a lot of these revolutions in other countries. And finally, I got here. I hope it doesn't, get co-opted, as we were saying before. But anyway, the whole notion of structural sin, which says that, no, sin is not just an individual matter. It's not just if you kill somebody that you sin. No, if you're part of the system, you're participating in the structural sin, because the system is oppressing people, and the system is killing people, like the military. You can
okay. I don't know if we can bring. Yeah, I'll hold it up, and if you can, just be slow. Oh, you've got it. Where do we go?
I mean, this is astounding.
Here you can see. This is the chart that she had about showing that the military.
So
I think 40% of the
47%
economy is now financed.
47% is the military budget.
40%. I'm wondering if I could.
47%.
47%. Yeah.
It's almost 50%.
But what I'm wondering about is that it seems to me, if I cast back over history, I don't think there's ever been, in terms of your thinking all of humanity, much less the ecology, there's ever been what would be seen in terms of what we're thinking of now, what would be seen as a just system. It was always a few people. It was the
But we're
Pharaoh.
Talking about right now, Harold.
No, we're not. You were talking about Jeremiah. I want to put a different premise.
That's what I'm saying, is that he was speaking out. No, and that's, the Occupy people are doing it in that same tradition.
All right, that same tradition is Jeremiah. It's
meaning
also
there have always been people that have spoken out against injustice, and today it's the Occupy people.
I'm trying to make a point. There never has been in all of human history a really systemically just system after civilization. We don't know when we were wandering around in the wilderness about, the hunting and gathering embedded in nature, what the reality was. That was a little bit more complex. But once we get to agriculture and civilization, there's always a ruling class, whether it's the Pharaoh or Nebuchadnezzar or whatever. And then we get to Rome. Rome was ruling, and they ruled for nearly 1,000 years. And then after they fell apart, they came to the feudal orders with the heretical.
Okay, but what's your point?
And then we get to a thing after the Enlightenment with our system that we set up in the world. And it isn't just. It never has been just.
Well, but,
so how far back do you go?
Everything is moving all the time.
Right.
So it's a question of not just sitting back and allowing it to, meaning because it goes through cycles when things are changed, and then they're better for a while, and then they slowly become, worse, and then they need to be changed again. So it's about continuing to transform things.
Well, okay, but the point I'm trying to make is,
right now we've sort of come to a dead end on what the revolution.
Okay, now you're getting to what I'm trying to talk about.
What the revolution in this country is. But that's what I'm saying.
Where do we begin?
Occupy are the people who are speaking out against what has happened now, because most of Americans have been in a state of apathy for the past few years.
Well, people all throughout history have been, have they not?
But I'm talking about Occupy. I'm not talking about.
Well, I'm trying not to talk about Occupy. You put Occupy
into
that's what
I want to talk about, because I want to talk about.
And I put it into a larger context.
I want to talk about.
I had a program the other day.
I want to talk about these laws that are being passed right now.
Okay, you don't want me to make the point.
No.
You want me talk, not make the point that it is not like a historical or political thing that you can do it. It is much larger than that. It's a systemic thing that can only be seen in terms of the transformation that's attempting to be born now, almost on speciation.
I want to talk I want to talk
you
about.
Can't see that.
I want to talk about
one little thing, a little change in historical patterns that we can look at.
I want to talk about the laws that are being passed.
You don't want to take it in a system.
No, I want to talk about the laws that are being passed.
Okay, you talk about the laws.
The very concrete laws that are being passed,
rather than talking about the fact that there's a major change that's going on, and it has cosmic implications. You don't want to go to that pattern. We'll go to one where we just talk about the politics.
I want to talk about. Well, I think it's about spirituality. I don't think it's about politics.
Well, spirituality.
I think it's about a betrayal of our moral core.
Oh, well,
because we presumably the society has some kind of a moral code and everything, except that we've betrayed the whole thing.
Well, the moral codes have been bent out of shape by political classes that use them to make themselves powerful.
So anyway, on the 31st...
it's been realpolitik the whole of history.
On the 31st of December, as we all know, this National Defense Authorization Act was passed.
Yes, okay,
let's talk. Which made it possible for, for anyone to be arrested on just on suspicion that they were associated with a terrorist group.
Yeah.
And of course, the question is, are they going to name Occupy Wall Street and anonymous terrorist groups and whatever else is around,
Well, they can just do the naming.
If they do that, if they do that, that means that anybody who is suspected of having an association with them, like you, because you're sitting here talking to me right
exactly.
now,
or you sitting there with that mask. I think they're going to want to outlaw that mask.
Well, but they won't know who I am because I'm wearing this mask. My identity.
But the wearing of the mask could become a criminal.
But my identity is well concealed. That's why I'm never going to take it off again.
Yeah, okay.
So they can't see who I am.
No, that's very dangerous, that thing.
Very dangerous.
And Obama signed it into
But anyway,
law,
there have been two more laws since then, which are pretty draconian. One of them is the what they're calling the anti-protest law, which is, the real name is H.R. 347, and it's the Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act of 2011. But apparently, I don't know when it was signed, but it was signed
just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's all. It just happened. Yeah.
So anyway, this is pretty draconian because they talk about that it'll be a felony to protest or do anything like that in the vicinity of a restricted building or grounds. Now they could declare that Wall Street is a restricted grounds.
Or Fallujah Park is restricted.
Exactly.
They just put up a little thing and say.
Or MNN right here.
Or
they can say this is restricted. So anybody who's.
And Mr. Bloomberg said he's got an army of 33,000 police that are out to enforce.
And then this thing goes into, and they talk about impeding or disrupting the orderly conduct of government business or official functions. You see that's the felony too, or sort of. Protesting in the vicinity of anyone who has Secret Service protection, and I mean we're in UN City where a lot of people have Secret Service protection, and you don't know who they are because they're walking around in plain clothes.
Yeah, they're putting up the barriers, are they not?
So the clincher here, I think, is that now they're starting to talk about conspiracy, and they say or attempts or conspires to do so.
Our talking here could be.
This is conspiracy.
Could walk in the door any minute.
This is conspiracy because we're if two people are talking about something,
that's a conspiracy.
That's a conspiracy, and that's what they did with the militia. That's how they got the militia people.
Back in the time of Waco.
Because at the time of Waco, so back in the 90s, they sent in agent provocateurs to rile these people up, and somebody would come in and you wouldn't know who they were, and they'd start saying, "We got to go get those bastards at the Federal Reserve or something."
Let's throw bombs.
You'd say, "Yeah, let's do that." And it's just a conversation; it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But you get arrested because you were conspiring.
Right.
You just for having said something like that.
Ancient regimes have done that all through history.
And if you've had a few drinks or something, you might say something. We all say things like that. Just as a matter of, if you're having a conversation and you say something like, I really would like to kill that bastard, who just did that to me or something. It doesn't mean that you're going out, that you're conspiring to do it. But from the government's point of view, that's conspiracy.
Well,
so this is in this act that just passed. This is in this
I know. It
thing
just last
just
week,
passed.
a couple weeks ago. Yeah, and
then the other one that just passed right after that.
And this is by Mr. Obama.
Mr. Obama. And then he signed into law an executive order on the 16th of March. A few days after that. And in this executive order, he gives himself and he designates all of the secretaries the authority to commandeer all domestic U.S. resources, including food and water, and all harnessing American citizens to fulfill labor requirements, and or to induct and draft American citizens into the military for the purpose of national defense.
Where's the source? What are you talking about him doing? Where is that from? What are you talking about? That's new to me.
This is the executive order that he just signed on
well, where?
the 18th.
Is that off a reputable source?
I sent it to you, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I sent you the whole text is there. I sent it to you.
Of what? Is that an act or something?
It's an executive order.
When?
The 18th of March.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
And in this order, you know, it's like, well, the thing is that a lot of executive orders have been declared unconstitutional, but, you know, while they're being declared unconstitutional, whoever gets nailed, you know, has to go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the unconstitutional things have not been declared unconstitutional. So here, it's like he has the ability, and this is for purposes of national defense, and it says in peacetime. Not even, it doesn't even have to be a phony national emergency.
There goes posse comitatus along with habeas corpus, I would suggest.
Well, plus, you know, the Fifth Amendment with the takings, and so, I mean, you know, where you can't, you know, at the time of the Revolution, it was, you know, you can't quarter soldiers in people's homes.
Yeah.
Well, that's all, they could go into your loft
Yeah.
and say, we're gonna, you know, we need this for the National Guard or something, and, you know, you're gonna have to go sleep in the street corner or at Penn Station or something.
It is setting it up for a police state.
But this is
to protect the system because they feel threatened by the systemic challenge.
Well, I think that this all has to do with Anonymous and OWS, and the militias are still out there. You know, they got set up and went underground as a movement and so on. But those people are still out there. You know, it's like, and you know, you just look at how many people you know belong to the NRA. The National Rifle Association.
Lobby. That's
well, but that's an army.
APAC,
you know, I think it's like 21 million people. Which means 21 million weapons out there.
Yeah.
And those are just the people who belong to that.
And you wrote that book, The Shooting Edge, did you not? Isn't it worth mentioning?
I did, of course, yes.
Yeah, and you're publishing it on your own?
I'm going to publish it eventually, but it just needs a lot of work on it.
Talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
You did that because you were among these people that
back in the 90s,
would have been part of what they call the right wing.
After the time, that's what is generally referred to as the right wing. And they were generally people I would describe as being in the Ron Paul camp.
Ron Paul and libertarianism, perhaps.
Exactly.
Okay,
and you know, at that time in the 90s, they were talking about the Boston Tea Party and so on.
Right.
And of course, now we have a movement that's called the Tea Party, which is being funded by some of the wealthiest people in the world. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything revolutionary.
Do you think the Tea Party is relevant, or is that just faded away?
Well, it's relevant because it creates problems. But you know, but originally the people who invoked the Tea Party were Ron Paul supporters, but that's an example of a movement that was totally co-opted when the Koch brothers came in and put in. So this is a danger, but obviously they're gearing up, and who knows what's going to come next week? You know. I mean...
well, why has this jumped up ever since just 6 months ago that the people find... It's always been unjust. And
because OWS started to become very visible 6 months ago.
But why now? Why not 20 years ago? Why not 100 years ago? Why not 200 years? Why now? What is there about the modern moment? We have a lot of things going on.
No, I think you just finished saying that this has been going on forever. I mean, it always has, you know.
You think it has?
Oh, of course.
So this is a continuation of things. What do we...
No, it's not a continuation. It's a different... Meaning, this is not a continuation of Germany, but it's similar to what happened in Germany. But it's not a continuation.
In fascist Germany.
Yeah.
Or this is...
But it's a sort of a repeat in many ways. But it doesn't mean it's a continuation.
No, but I meant the Occupy. If it's
Occupy is a new movement. It's not an old movement.
There's no precedent out of history.
Well, the American Revolution, I mean...
Well, the American Revolution was a political thing dealing with Britain and America. This is something that, as some of our programming today indicated, it's not just America and Wall Street, it's the world.
It's the world,
It's the whole world is getting up and saying
globalization.
Something is out of sync with what we need.
We have global structural oppression. Meaning it used to be sort of more confined to countries, and now it's global because of globalization.
Right.
So that's the reason,
That's part of it, yeah.
So the Occupy is very, they were very tight in.
You don't think it's because...
They were very tight in the beginning with the Egypt Spring, with the Arab Spring and so on.
And then they
so those people were part of the planning
CIA
here.
overthrew Libya and Gaddafi and that kind of stuff.
It wasn't the CIA, it was the U.S. Military,
well, the military,
which was part of NATO.
Yeah, but and the DIA, they were, anyway.
I mean, it was our weapons, our rockets and our airplanes and our bombing.
That's not the CIA. Our NATO that did that and everything like that. But the thing is, I'm getting back to it again, is that we're part of an evolutionary process that began 200,000 years ago with our species, and now the weapons systems that exist, Nita. I did a program a couple of weeks, we aired it, one from '86 with Isaac Asimov. He tried to make the point, unlike saying this is just a continuum, this is the defining moment in terms of the evolution of species, not just some political change from feudalism to capitalism.
That's too abstract for me, Harold.
Okay. Well,
I want to talk about concrete things because
I
don't. Philosophy is an abstract thing, and it's like it's very abstract.
But
I don't want to talk about abstract things because the situation we're living in is very real and it's very concrete.
Okay.
And the banks would like nothing better than for us to talk about abstract principles and so on because it would let them off the hook.
I would suggest.
It would let them off the hook completely.
No, I would suggest.
If we're sitting there debating about, whatever.
Well, okay, if you think that, okay, we can go back to talking about it in political terms if you want, but I think that's just, it's encompassed within a larger understanding of the evolutionary process itself, because we've reached a point in the unique thing about...
But that's too abstract.
It isn't abstract if you listen to the end of a sentence.
But I've been listening to you, Harold. You interrupt me so I can interrupt you.
Okay. Well, okay, good enough. Well, I'm of the opinion that this is the definitive thing that can only be understood almost in species terms. We're coming to the end of the human experience.
But that may be true. But that's,
I think that's true.
But that's not what Occupy Wall Street is about.
It makes it different, and it makes the thing that inchoately is there being expressed is at a different level than just understanding history. History is a nightmare of injustice for all of humanity, and we're waking up from that nightmare perhaps, but in order to get at that, you have to have a systems understanding, not one that's just politically
rooted in history. But Occupy Wall Street is about a system, and that's what we're talking about. When we talk about structural oppression and structural criminality, we're talking about systems. We're not talking about individual acts on the parts of the banks or anything. No, we're talking about a structural criminality there.
You're talking about
where criminality is built into the system, by definition.
Built into the system
so that if you live, but there are degrees. So that if you work for a bank, you're more a part of it than if you just do a program at M&N.
Well, no, but if you believe in original sin, there are people who thought of that. They got all kinds of things to understand.
I don't believe in original sin. I don't know what original sin is.
But what I'm saying is you're getting to a point where we're coming into a relationship that is qualitatively, it's like coming to the end of the birth canal. We're coming to the end of something really, really big.
Well, that's what all the New Age people say.
Well, the New Age people are people who have been part of that kind of thinking.
But that's what the people who took Kool-Aid down in New Guinea said.
The Vedics have been saying
that. We don't know whether we're coming to the end or not.
No, but one of the indications is that we have weapon systems, and you would do it, that are able to wipe out the entire species.
Well, I don't understand what the point. What is the point you're trying to make?
It's that there's a new existential reality in
but
universe.
I'm interested in living in a country where banks are not taking homes away from people, where the only way you can get an education here is by borrowing astronomical amounts of money that you can never pay back.
Yeah.
I mean, in other countries, education is free in many poor countries. I'm interested. Those are the things I'm interested in. I'm interested in living in a country where I can get some work. And what they're doing in this country is they're outsourcing all of their work to other countries and so on. I mean, it's like, one of the things that Obama talks about in this executive order that he talked about is he talks about you know, safeguarding the industrial base in this country. And I'm sitting there and say, what industrial base? We're exporting it all. I mean, we don't, you know, the military doesn't even use uniforms that are made in this country. They're made in China or something. I mean, you know, like
Apple computers are all made in China.
Exactly, everything, you know, so this is the problem. So I'm interested, and you know, I don't care where they're made, but the point is that there's no work here for people, or there's very little work.
Okay.
And so I'm interested in these concrete issues.
You're interested in economics then, is that it?
No, I'm not interested in economics.
You're interested in economic what?
No, I'm interested in living in a system that works equitably, and where there is justice, and where there is you know, where there
existed.
Where there
has there ever been a system that
we're
did?
talking about degrees.
Okay.
Back in the 70s, let's say, as opposed to now, there was work. It was very easy to go out and find work. It was very easy to go out and find an apartment in New York. And I mean, if you wanted to move 2 blocks away, you could go find an apartment within a matter of a week and move and pay the same rent. Now the rents are so exorbitant, you can't. You know, it's like you can bear. You know, there was a front page article in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago about a woman who's living in who's 70 years old, which is not very old, and she's living in an apartment that she's lived in her whole life, and she's a widow, and the government is telling her that that her apartment is under-occupied, so she either has to move to a smaller apartment or take in, I guess, homeless people. And they're starting to do that. They're talking now about under-occupied spaces in New York, so you better watch out.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that on the media.
You know, this wasn't part of the debate back in the 70s. So just in 30 years.
What changed? How do we account for the fact that this thing came now?
Well, I think a lot of
years ago.
Well, it started to come when the Soviet Union collapsed.
Okay,
in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And what happened, because before that, remember there was this whole thing about if you worked for IBM, you know, you could work there your whole life, and it was sort of a model for other companies. You know, it's like as long as you did your job in these big corporations, you were there forever. There was job security. If you didn't want to do that, you could. I mean, I can remember in the 70s. You know, it's like everybody. If you wanted to get a temp job, you just call up an employment agency, and they'd get you a temp job in some corporation for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You could sit there and study. Students all did that. Study, read your books. You know, and you just had to maybe answer the phone, and you were a temp. Well, that no longer exists. You can't get temp jobs. You can't get anything. I'm getting. You know, I do freelance work.
Yeah, I know that.
And I get paid. You know, like the same amount of money that I got paid 18 years ago, but everything is a lot more expensive. So, you know, this is what I mean by I want to go back to the way it was before.
Here in America, that was a golden age in a certain sense.
It was a golden age. That's what I'm saying. It hasn't always been like it is right now.
No, it is.
We've gone through cycles where it has been like the Depression.
It wasn't very good for the people on the reservations whose land had been stolen, the Aboriginal peoples. It wasn't very good for most of the people of the world.
Well, that's why I did.
At that time, it was good for a few people
I did that program where I talked about Russell Means, you know, thing where he said, "Welcome to the reservation," and he basically said, "Welcome," and you know, now all Americans live on the reservation.
So now you're getting
and I agree.
But
I don't think anybody should live on the reservation.
Yeah, but you're there, and you're getting a feel for what it's like to be oppressed. And the people, middle class, and people who have been comfortably ensconced in the middle class, professors, that kind of stuff, is beginning to be challenging the very premises by which the economy
because they're oppressing more and more people. Instead of emancipating people, they're oppressing more and more people all the time.
Well, that's a larger theme that I was thinking about. They're going to be oppressing.
Well, that's what these laws, that's why I wanted to talk about these executive orders and so on, because this is about controlling people, about putting more people in jail, about, you know, and why do they have to do that? Because there's less work for people and so on.
Well, that's your premise, is less work. Work and employment.
Yeah, I know you have a different, but I don't want to get into the economics.
You don't want to get into the economics.
I'd just as soon have a job and work. Meaning I don't, you know,
everybody do.
You know, it's like I'm satisfied with that. I don't mind going out and getting a job, but right now you can't go out and get jobs.
And it's Mr. Keynes warned that is going to become characteristic. They're not going to be able, in the name of economics, need people when they got combines.
I remember back in the 70s.
Automatically produce
but I remember back in the 70s, for instance, we were talking about, I think it was the 14 families in El Salvador that they owned everything.
Well, they do in the planet.
No. This is in El Salvador in the 70s.
It's all over the world. It's a
Harold,
few plutocratic class that owns all the assets.
But it wasn't just 14 families that owned everything in this country at that time, but it is now.
Yeah.
It's probably fewer. It's probably 5, But families that own everything.
Well, it's very concentrated.
But the whole point is that Americans couldn't conceive of how Salvadorians could put up with this, and it's happened in this country too. So instead of this country being a place that was getting away from oppression, and so of course there's always been oppression here too.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
But instead of a country that was moving away from it and moving toward justice and elections and democracy and all this stuff that we hear about, it has moved in the direction of Nazi Germany or of El Salvador in those days, and that's what's happened. And these laws, show that they're planning to clamp down even more.
Yeah.
So Occupy Wall Street is about injustices, and it's about calling the shots, calling to account the structural oppression and the structural violence and the structural criminality in the world.
They will turn the people into the way they're seen by the people who have control and ownership of all the corporate assets that are responsible increasingly for production in a ratio with labor, and they see the people as serfs, and they'll turn them into serfs as they were on a feudal estate.
You see, this all came about...
And they're protecting
this all came out into the open,
but
it wasn't, if you worked for IBM before the Soviet Union collapsed, you really did have security. If that's the kind of a life you wanted to have, you had a job for life. You had to wear your little white shirts and your ties, but you had all kinds of benefits and so on. But that doesn't exist anymore. You work for IBM now, and you might be laid off any week.
Right.
And that happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. All of a sudden, it's like that moral core that existed even within, say, big business in this country disappeared, because all of a sudden big business didn't have to demonstrate to the world that capitalism or American-style capitalism was better than Soviet oppression. It's like all of a sudden the checks and balances were gone. I almost wish we'd go back to the Cold War, because there was a sense that we had to be better than the Soviets. And that's gone now. And now it's all about, we have to make more profits for the shareholders. And of course, everybody is part of that structural violence, because it's like everybody, if you buy things and so on, you're participating in that. If you breathe,
the Jains
you're participating in that.
The Jains are so conscious of that they don't want to even walk, because they might destroy some piece of bacteria or something. They're really sensitive to walk lightly on the earth.
What was it? Romney, apparently his blind trust fund bought a Chinese company that uses technology here for spying on people and so. I mean, you're sitting here and saying, of course, he didn't have anything to do with it directly, because it's a blind trust. But the question, that's structural criminality, because it means you're consciously part of a system that is going to allow you to not, be aware of the criminality that your money is participating in, and that's making it possible for you to be rich and make a living and whatever, and campaign for president.
And make it. So again, why now? Hasn't it?
Because it's gotten worse. Because it's gotten so much worse in the 70s. That's why.
Since, let's just say this, in the 20th century, and so what's changed? It would be the technology. I don't think biologically, when a baby is born, they're any different than they were 200 years ago. But what
apparently the technology is changing people's brains and so on too.
No, but they are confected by the technological or the media mix in which they're born into, and the evolving system and everything. So it's changed to a point that has a sort of quality of gestation within the historical process. I just say that we're coming to a point where, and I don't think it's existentially insignificant to think about the fact that the extended consciousness that's unique to humanity has reached a point where, in realpolitik terms, where power has always come out of the end of a gun, where if you can conquer the other people, like Russell Means said, then you conquer them and you improve your thing. has been led by the political class that wants weapon systems that give them an advantage, like the mutiny of 1857 in India. They had the Gatling gun they could conquer because they had the power. That still holds in terms of international relations.
And we're all on the reservation now. This was made by a Lakota Indian on Pine Ridge. Isn't it beautiful?
I saw Russell Means on television. But he thinks he's dying now, but he's glad to have seen, because inexorably the American empire is imploding. He said he is so pleased that that's finally happening because he has. But anyway, the weapon systems collectively, existentially, in universe, have now and only, according to the modeling, reached the point where if they exist, not inflection points of theory, but the things that actually exist are ready to be pushed still, despite START and everything like that. If they're unleashed, we've got the capability to destroy the entire Homo sapiens species.
Okay,
that's an existential new reality in the universe.
So what point are you making?
I'm making the point that this is not just a political.
Well, but then it won't matter.
No, I'm making the point in order
to If that happens, it won't matter.
No, I'm making the point in order to make the other side of that extent, that capability, that technological extent, well,
I believe that it's a spiritual crisis.
Well, I don't.
Because when you start talking about,
that's a spiritual,
the moral core and everything. I mean, it's really a spiritual crisis.
We can stop the evolution process of this universe that we can understand that we've been going through for 200,000 years, 3.8 billion years of evolution that got started uniquely in this parallel, or this universe, and maybe parallel. It's not just your normal political event that's going on. It's something that is like the end of a gestation
It's the spiritual.
And on the positive side.
Because spirituality is much more all-encompassing than economics or politics or anything.
Okay.
Because spirituality, and I know you don't believe in all of this.
Well, I wouldn't not believe in anything, because I'm a synergetic. I mean, it's up for grabs what it is, but the spiritual.
And today I've got on my silver collar. This is my.
But there's no absolutes. It's synergetic.
No,
we don't know. We may go either way, and there's nothing says that we're going to go in a particular way because you got some God that's directing it or something.
Well, the only thing that's going to keep us from doing that is something like, if people really listen to what Occupy is saying, because that's what they're warning people about.
What are they warning us about?
They're warning us about. Yes, they're warning us about. They're warning us about corporate greed, which is the cause of all that. Corporate greed and control. They're warning about the systemic, the structural criminality of control and so on, which is what can take us to that.
And that will take us.
And that's that's why they are so. That's why they're so relevant.
Yeah, well,
because that's what they're standing up to.
The system that they're trying to have with your laws and so forth are verifying, putting up the walls against any kind of a thing that would be bringing a systemic change that might have anything to do with a universal justice. These wisdom schools have been talking about. They're putting so they're going to lead to a situation. And what would that situation lead to? It would lead to an unworkable thing. It will lead to gated things. It will lead to that. And then that is going to, and the ultimate thing that will lead to it is the final, totally irrational unleashing of the weapons.
So that's what they're saying.
And the end of the Homo sapiens
What they're saying is,
species.
let's dismantle this system so that possibility no longer
but do you understand
exists.
what I'm saying?
Yes,
it's not like we couldn't do.
But that's why we need to support Occupy Wall Street. And I want to say one thing.
Well, I want to support Occupy Wall Street.
I'm an Occupy person, but I'm sort of a one-person affinity group.
Yeah.
And as long as they don't have cards that you carry, I don't know whether I'm a member or not of it.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean, they've been debating all this of who's a member and who's not a member and so on, which is good because it means that it's like they're processing all of this. But I'm an independent member of Occupy Wall Street.
You've always been independent as long as I can remember.
Exactly. Whatever I'm a member of, I'm still independent.
Yeah, I know.
But a part of me does belong to that movement, whether they know it or not.
Oh, I'm in support of it 1,000%.
And I have I'm a one-person affinity group. So, it's like I don't go to the report backs or anything, but I guess I should start going and reporting back on what my one-person affinity group
But
does,
I think the thing that they're doing, putting up all these walls and resisting it and just breaking up that thing that goes down, having a police state, 33,000 police force that Mr. Bloomberg does to make sure that none of this nonsense nonsense about Occupy Wall Street gets into the consciousness. It's not in the media at all. In the
they're terrified of it.
But it's going to lead to a thing, and ultimately, what it's going to lead to is an unworkable system because there's going to be resistance.
Well, but it's already led to that.
The worrying thing at the extreme.
We're calling the shots on the unworkable system.
To an ungodly or an unleashing of the weapon systems. And the question that should be put before us all, do they still have the potential, particularly with new chemical systems and things they have, in order to gain a political advantage?
Well, the only thing that we can do, Harold,
species lethal.
The only thing that we can do is to speak up. The only thing we can do is to speak up against this system, this system of control that is the one putting into place the police state and the military industrial complex and so on.
Let's see.
We do it in different ways.
But
I say, I'm doing it.
Well, I'm questioning your premise. You had a police you had a police state that built up in Nazi Germany that was pretty destructive. But there was no way they could stop evolution.
I can't go into a military factory and destroy whatever is there. I can't destroy the system, but I can by speaking up. And one of the things that I do, I'm speaking up right here, and this is my armband.
Let's lay that out, because you were at the thing of.
Well, if you recall,
you set it up.
If you recall, back in, was it December? I guess when the Occupy people were evicted from Zuccotti Park.
I remember. They
were in the vicinity. Zuccotti Park is just a block away from Trinity Wall Street, which is a big Episcopal church, powerful Episcopal church, which is the third largest landowner in New York City.
Is that true?
Yes, and they didn't know this at the time, but they had allowed them to have a few meetings there and so on. The priests there, and they weren't supporting them too much, but they knew that they owned the land, which is that park at
Trinity Church.
I
know that one. This is gravestone.
Canal Street, and what is it, 6th Avenue, I guess.
I think it is.
Duarte Park.
Yeah.
So they thought, well, we'll just move there, and they did, and the church called the police and had them thrown out and so on, and then of course they found out, from some of the friendly priests that the vestry members, which whose names are kept secret, were all the people on the boards of these big banks on Wall Street and so on, and that's why they didn't want them there. So anyway, so they organized this whole thing to take back to reoccupy the park. They went there, and Bishop Packard went, and he went over the wall, and I showed this at the last one, and there was almost no media about that. Almost no media about that. But the thing is that the police came and they arrested all of them, including the bishop and everything, and took back and said, no, you can't have this park, even though it's not being used for anything. It's like it's just an empty little triangle there.
Yeah.
So as a member, as a healing minister in the Episcopal Church, and as a member of the Episcopal Church, I feel very strongly about this, because I believe that Christianity is about justice and so on, and that's why Jesus died on the cross. So when we had the consecration of our new bishop to be at St. John the Divine the other day, just 2 Saturdays ago, I walked in the procession. All of the churches sent 2 people, and the Church of Sanctus Priest sent me to walk in the procession, and I carried, an icon of Christ, because I also write icons.
Okay.
And I wore my armband.
Well, you can maybe come in on that. That's a police barricade, Occupy.
But it says Occupy on it.
Yeah, it says Occupy.
So it says something different.
And I understand you were snubbed by some of the Grand Masters.
I was when it got to where you shake hands with people and say the peace to them. The woman priest sitting in front of me, who was wearing her her priest garb, she turned away when I extended my arm to her.
Yeah.
And of course, the reason, you see, this is what I call, and
this is what you would call. If you had walked up to her with the mask on.
Well, I wondered, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we should start wearing masks.
The reason I didn't do it that day is because I didn't want to embarrass my church, But and this is not an embarrassment to the church, but a mask would. But normally I would wear a mask, and maybe I will one day if I went as an independent. But then I wouldn't have been able to.
Do they wear these masks at the demonstrations?
A lot of them do.
Or are they trying to make that?
But you're not allowed to put them over. It is illegal in New York to wear a mask.
It is illegal to wear a mask?
on the streets. Yes.
Is it really?
Yes.
Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding. No.
Okay.
So they've actually arrested people for that. So that's why they wear them on top of their heads now.
Oh.
So, you know, instead of wearing them here. And a lot of people don't wear them because they consider that big corporation is that makes these and that holds the patent or the copyright or whatever it is, is profiting from it. So, you know, so this is all built into it too. But anyway, what I want to talk about, you see, to me, this is, and this is structural sin, you know, when you're talking about a church, you know, and because, you know, it's like the vestry members of all of these big churches are all of these people who are on the boards of directors of these Wall Street things.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, they talk about, you know, they send food to Africa and everything, but they don't want any justice here. Yeah. And I thought that was unconscionable that they wouldn't let them have that park, you know, and then Bishop Packer, who's a former bishop, he thought so too, and that's why he went over the fence. He was 70 years old or something. And his wife was there standing, she was standing outside. She was beaten up by the police.
Wow, okay.
I mean, she was just standing there. I mean, you know, it's like, so you know, this is the thing. And then I talked to her after the consecration, and she was at the consecration with her husband, and with some of the Episcopal priests who were also arrested that day, because there's a whole coterie of them. But it's not the Episcopal Church; it's individual priests who are doing it. Right. And you see, what I think should happen. I think the church itself should stand up for Occupy people and so on. But what happened was that the police commissioner Kelly. He was, you know, his name was read out as being an honored dignitary at this consecration, and like she said, well, this man is a criminal. He's sending his police out to, you know, to beat up people. She got beaten up and everything, and so they were going to write a letter to the bishop protesting. Why was Kelly? What did he have to do with the consecration, you know?
So they're putting all this pressure and
so there's all this pressure going on, you see, and
to squelch Occupy.
It's a squelch Occupy. And the way I see it is, you know, I sort of, you know, I do my individual actions in the venues that are part of my normal life. So I'm not down there on Wall Street at the marches that they have and everything. One, because I don't have, you know, like I don't have all this time on my hands that they have, you know.
Right. Okay.
I have a lot of things to do and so on. But and if I were 25, I would be down there.
Oh, you're not 25?
I'm 26.
Oh, of course. Well,
so anyway,
changes when you're 25.
But I think that all of us who are in this position, we need to start. I think that we need to put a lot more emphasis on older people who are over 25 doing our individual actions. Like, I think everybody should have an armband like this, and people should be wearing them all over the city, everywhere.
And you also spoke up about institutions like churches and boards of and should be speaking up in favor. I've seen people of great note. I saw John Reed, who was the head of Citigroup, say he thought Occupy Wall Street was a good idea. On Bill Moyers the other night, it was staggering to have somebody like that who had been right at the core of everything that happened in 2008.
Well, the thing,
I saw Condoleezza Rice, who was, you know, Condoleezza Rice, saying she thought there was some good things to. The people should be saying that they think there's something going on with Occupy and support it, rather than just say, bully boys, go beat them down.
Well, the thing is,
leave everything the way it is. We're comfortable with the way things are. They should be.
The problem is that a lot of these people who work in these positions and who are, you know, part of the structural oppression and structural criminality,
which is virtually every institution.
They think of themselves as being independent. If they don't do an independent act of criminality, they believe that they're not doing anything criminal. Well, it's a way of bringing to them awareness. And you know, they had a system of a moral core before the Soviet Union collapsed, so they should be able to get it back.
I disagree.
It may have been hypocritical. No, a lot of people who work in those places, a lot of people who work in those places do have that moral core, but they're not allowed to keep it because they wouldn't be able to keep their jobs. Well, I mean, I watched.
There again, it's wage slavery, is it not?
You work in a place like that, and you know, and the pressure is on to you know, to make money for the company, and to at a certain point to do what you're told. And of course, everybody's forgotten about the Nuremberg trials, where you know, people, you know, not
the lonely crowd, or all the things about
where you know, not
ever go to an IBM
not
office?
Knowing was not, you know, that you were, it was no excuse. You know, it's like if you were out there following orders was no excuse. So people are all following orders. But there are people who are working in these places who are conscious conscious of the fact that they're following orders that they don't want to follow and so on. And we have to appeal to those people and make them stronger.
Yeah.
You see, because they don't know what to do. You know, they have families they have to support and everything.
That's what keeps them
and they have these high rents here that they have to pay.
They're enslaved to the economic system that is not serving them well.
But it goes all the way up to the top in many instances.
I beg your pardon?
It goes all the way up to the top in many instances.
But you said how much do you think? We're coming to the end of the week's program, Gary. I'm very worried about co-option, that they will co-opt it. I get worried when people like Condoleezza Rice
Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Ben and Jerry's ice cream offered Occupy Wall Street $1 million a few weeks ago. And there was one article that I read in Good Morning New York, AM New York, I guess that rag that they give out on the papers, which is actually the best newspaper in New York.
It's got good stuff.
It's got the best stuff. That's what I read. That and the television when I go up and down an elevator. That's where I get my news, and through word of mouth. And I'm more informed than most people.
You always have been.
But anyway, they had a little article about how the Occupy people were voting on this and so on, and that they were basically saying that they wanted to turn it down. And I think they must have turned it down. But,
well, that may be.
But you see, these are signs of groups wanting to move in and co-opt them.
So you got your finger on the pulse, and you think that Occupy is alive and well on a world scale, and they're not going to be able to squelch it or beat it down or co-opt it. It's going to grow.
They might co-opt it, but they're not co-opting right now.
Well, co-opting is the way in which they usually
get the
juice out of any kind of movement for justice. Isn't that the case?
Of course.
They co-opt.
But in order to co-opt them, they would really have to give them all jobs and forgive all of their student loans.
Said you're not
so it would cost a lot of money.
Well, it also would be something that's not in the cards because the automation is taking over the work of what has been done by human beings, as Aristotle said would happen.
Of course, what's
interesting in its structure.
What's interesting about that is that we were worried that automation was going to take over the low-level jobs, the unskilled labor, and it really took over a lot of the white-collar workers.
Well, and the algorithms now, and that. I think we shouldn't even get in anyway. So I'm glad to hear that there's word from the front, as it were, that the Occupy movement.
They're very well organized. They have marches every day. They don't get reported on. They have meetings going all day long every day, and it's mostly the people that are organizing these things, but there are lots of them, and then a lot more people turn out for the marches. So you were saying, well, there weren't that many. Yeah, there are lots of marches. They're going on all the time.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm hoping to hear that.
And they're gearing up for spring right now. So
spring is coming.
Spring is coming. They've got 6 months of good weather because you got to remember they started out in the fall right before the bad weather.
Right, that's right.
And now they've got 6 months of good weather ahead of them, and they're not going to go away.
Maybe that's why all these repressive measures and executive orders are
being passed
in order to gear up for a police state reaction
because
to what they see
with the good
happening.
weather. I mean, it's like they're starting. They were having all of their meetings down at 60 Wall Street, which is that public space under Deutsche Bank.
Yeah,
ironically,
atrium there.
That atrium, And now they're starting to have their meetings in the parks
but
again.
They're having not only that, they're having meetings all over the world. That's the thing. It's a worldwide
But Occupy
thing.
Wall Street is about New York.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street is about New York, but it's part of a larger worldwide thing that we can see, and it's basically got to have something to do to question the systems.
It's all over this country too.
Yes, and my only difference with you is it's not just a political change like defeating communism or winning the Second World War.
But I don't see it as I don't see it as a political thing. I see it more as a spiritual
spiritual thing.
Because I think it's on a higher invisible level than politics.
Well, that's the realm of much of the considerations of something beyond the mere material, which is part of most of the wisdom schools and all of that. That's included in it. And you have we're down to where we got an opportunity with the extended capability with an appropriate system to liberate the humanity in its complete instead of just a few.
But first of all, people have to realize that they're enslaved.
With an ecological addendum,
and that's what Occupy Wall Street is shedding light on what the problem is, so that people can wake up. People have to wake up first.
Okay, they got to wake up, and if they're going to do it, they can listen to Nita. Thanks for a report from the front, my dar. Out on the barricades as usual. Your pleasure, Nira Renfrew, who's down there with her mask and all. And thank you very much for viewing. Happy to hear that it may be alive and well, and may it prosper in this spring that's emerging. And thanks for bringing that report from the front.
And we're going to see more
you feel
laws.
Like a war correspondent.
More laws like this too.
Okay, I'm afraid, but we got to keep our eye open.
One a week.
Thank you for viewing. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Thank you very much for viewing.
Thanks
for coming
Harold.
in. Okay.
Yeah,
you look great in that mask. Don't ever take it off.
I can't take it off anymore.